Just thought I'd let you know that we have just launched the podcast on YouTube. Tune into our electrifying conversations with local runners and expert guests, covering everything from training tips to inspiring stories that'll have you lace up your sneakers in no time. But wait, there's more. Spread the word like wildfire, and don't forget to hit the share button, tell your running buddies, your workout pals, heck, even tell your neighbour's cat. Everyone deserves to join the running revolution. So you're thinking about running, but not sure how to take the first step. My name is Brian Patterson, and I'm here to help. Welcome to Brian's Run Pod. Welcome back to Brian's Run Pod. Now to the second part of my discussion with Husnara, the first one being last week. So if you haven't listened to it, please do have a listen. It's a fascinating topic. Well, today I started off by asking her what was her motivation for writing the book about mental health and running. Let me talk about your book.
Okay.
So if you're happy to discuss it now. So what's gave you the motivation to, what was the reasoning behind you starting to write a book?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. So the book, I think what really sparked it, to be honest, was COVID and my experience during the lockdowns. So, I mean, I had, just to backtrack a bit, so I've been running for, since I was 16, I'm 39 now, so quite a few decades now. And over time, I've noticed that, running was how it was impacting me. It just made me feel good. But it was during a couple of times in my life where I noticed that how it was having an impact on me psychologically. Firstly, it was the time after I had my firstborn. I was 30 at the time and ran the London Marathon 9 months after giving birth. So the marathon training was a great way just to just have that space for myself, that time. And I loved it. It was incredible. And that's when I kind of experienced quote unquote, the runner's high. And I remember just feeling so much oh goodness, just such an incredible feeling of peace. And I just described it at the time as meditation. Yeah. So that was the first time I realized, wow, running makes me feel so good and it gives me such a high. So that was my first experience of that mental connection. But really what prompted the book, I guess, is what happened during COVID. So during COVID, a few weeks into lockdown, I gave birth to my second daughter in April amongst all the chaos of lockdowns. Yeah. Am I going to give birth in hospital or not? Or is it going to be a home birth and all of that madness, and death toll was rising day by day.
And you were in the UK at the time.
I'm in the UK at the time. I only moved to Bali just over a year ago now. But I was in the UK. I was in London at the time. Yeah. And I had just gone on maternity leave, literally not a week before lockdown. So it was just mad, Yeah. So what I noticed was that, so the first few months of lockdown were fine. And then when the winter set in, we had just moved house during the second lockdown, a really stressful time, financially and physically. And that's when my daughter, the youngest one, the newborn, started to regress in her sleep and she wasn't sleeping. She wasn't sleeping. It was horrific. She was waking up every single hour, by the hour, every night. And obviously we were sort of, at the time, we were in our little bubbles. We couldn't really see family, and I had massive family, but I couldn't lean on them for support. Yeah. And my husband was around, but he was also working. So he was out early morning, working in central London. So it was tough. Yeah. And I was beyond exhausted. I can't, people talk about sleep deprivation. It's honestly, I know it, and it sounds silly, but it just, you don't realize it until you're in it, what it can do for you mentally and physically. Yeah. I would wake up in the morning, and just to give it a bit more context, so at the time we were in the second lockdown, and I was also homeschooling my eldest. Yeah. And obviously, alone for most of the day. not sleeping at all, pretty much, maybe an hour here and there during the night. And I would wake up in the morning in floods of tears because my body would feel like I've been bruised from the lack of sleep. Yeah. And I just remember just feeling like, how am I going to get through the day? Yeah. And I had to feed the kids. I had to do the schooling. I had to get through the day. It was during that time, I don't know what it was, but I started running again.
You had the energy to start running again. My God.
I think I just needed a bit of time for myself, I think that's where it came from. So I had kind of run a little bit during the summer here and there, but then I remember I just needed that time to myself. So I thought, okay, when I could in the mornings, I remember there was a few mornings I had just thought, okay, I just need that time, a few minutes to myself. So I've gone out for a run. And what I noticed was that when I came back from those runs in those really cold, bitter days in the UK in January 2021, was that not only had I just came back with energy, which is obviously amazing from running, but a lot of the frustrations that I had built up in my head, I had managed to rethink them or reshape them and change them completely. And I used to go away. I used to leave the house thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get through the day? And I used to come back thinking, oh my God, bring it on. Right. I've got this, bring it on. So my mindset had shifted totally. And the things that were frustrating me throughout the day, I had just rationalized myself with. It was like I was my own therapist on that run. Yeah. So that's what
it's like someone had given you a drug.
Yeah.
And then, it was a 30-minute, 35-minute drug.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it was like there was another person that had come up in my head who was with me on the run almost. And we were conversing, and it was kind of like that. Like I had this other person to talk through things with in a way. I know it sounds a bit odd, but anyway, it was that shift in how I was thinking and my negative thoughts and how that enabled me to get through the day. And that's when I was like, wow, this is incredible. And that's when I started to wonder, I wonder if other people feel the same.
Right.
And that's when it got really, really interesting. So when I started digging, I was hearing all these incredible stories of people who'd overcome incredible things through running. So I'll give you a couple of examples that really shook me.
Yeah.
So there's a guy called Anders Schmidt from Denmark. And he started running 10 hours after his 6-year-old daughter's ventilator was turned off. And running became a way for him to deal with the grief and the loss of his firstborn child.
Wow.
And even just saying that now, it just gives me goosebumps. Yeah. I was like, wow. And there were other stories. So there's a woman called Nita Sweeney from America who suffers from depression and has been suffering from depression for decades. At the age of 49, she started running, did the Couch to 5K. And what's incredible is that she had been on psychiatric medication for 37 years. And within a year or so of running, and she started training for a marathon or races and stuff, at one point, she came off medication altogether. And her psychiatrist and her were having this conversation. We're like, the only thing that had changed in her life was that she was running. So these are just a couple of just incredible stories that I heard and I've collected as well as part of the book that made me think, wow, there is something so powerful, so profound in running that I wanted to know what that was. Yeah. And that's when the analytical side of me was like, oh my God, I need to find out why, what's going on, what's happening mentally, psychologically in the brain that's allowing people to deal with these things. And how can we get other people to, what can we get from those stories? Yeah. From those.
So do you sort of draw on your experience of working in mental health and, sort of combining that with the running? Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah. I guess what I mainly draw on is I lean on my academic background or analytical background. So I've been in research for over 15 years, government research and also academic institutions in the UK. So I guess I lean on that. So I'm looking at in the book, I'm looking at the science in terms of what happens in the brain when we run. And I know you did a podcast on this recently as well, looking at the endocannabinoids and the neurogenesis, all about how when we run, it's creating new brain cells, new connections. So it help, kind of give you another way of understanding how people are getting new perspectives. So I look at what's happening in the brain, but look at what's happening psychologically too, because there's lots of similarities to what happens in like traditional therapies even. So I make those connections. I also include real life stories of people who have overcome some adversities from addiction, like Nita Sweeney, who's, dealt with depression, who's suffered from depression for decades. She's in the book. And so includes rape, grief, so quite a lot of different types of trauma.
Oh, right. Okay.
Big things,
Yeah.
And then in the end, I guess what I do is what's different about this book is that what you get from it is that there are some exercises in the book that helps you to discover the power of running for yourself and what it can do for you mentally.
Right.
So there's exercises. So just to give you a glimpse of, how it can help you with your thoughts, for example. So that's in a nutshell what the book is about and how I got to this point.
So could you just go into basically as to what are the things that we could do, as runners to help? Let's say, for instance, either we've had a bad day at work or we're going through a stressful time, in our family life, maybe we're getting over a bereavement.
Yeah.
Is there anything, specifically, within running or different types of running that could help?
Yeah. So I guess what I kind of talk about, one of the amazing things that happens when we run is that it helps us to reprocess trauma or reframe sort of negative experiences. So even kind of what I was saying about my experience, about how it turned my day around because my thoughts around my frustrations have shifted, I think that's a really important one. I mean, there are lots of amazing things that do happen when you run psychologically, but the one I guess that's quite interesting is the, reframing trauma. So I think that's really interesting. And when it comes to trauma, it's all about how you perceive the trauma is really interesting, because if you perceive what's happened to you in a very negative way, that has ramifications on how you act, your motivation, your energy levels, and your thinking, everything, has a knock-on effect on how you perceive that trauma. So, and just to kind of give that a bit more life, if you like, I'll give you an interesting example or analogy. So I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but have you ever wondered what's the difference between a hero and a villain? Have you ever wondered what are the key differences between them?
Well, I don't know whether sort of the hero saves the day or, a hero will, I don't know. I suppose, I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of at the moment, at the top of my head. Yeah.
No,
So yeah. So if there could be I'm over here in the UK. We're watching The Traitors. So the villain might be the people who might put people in sort of uncomfortable positions and have a scheming plan or something like that. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, that's the only thing I would.
Exactly. Yeah, and as you say, the hero saves the day. So what it comes back to, when you start looking at the hero and the villains and you sort of scratch the surface, you realize actually that they both have very similar backstories.
Right.
So both often have suffered some sort of trauma, and most of the superheroes, that we know about, like Batman and the Joker, for example, they both suffered childhood trauma. But it's about how they perceive that trauma that has a knock-on effect on their motivation.
That's true,
yeah. And how they carry out their lives effectively.
Yes.
So it's the same for ourselves, if when we go through a trauma, if we just see it in such a negative way, then, it's going to have a knock-on effect. So our perception of trauma is really important. And how it comes back to running is really key, because that during running and through the stories and science, I've discovered that what running allows you to do is shift the way you see your trauma.
Right.
So in so many examples I've seen where people have gone from seeing something that's really horrific that's happened to them, that they thought was like, oh my God, the failure of their lives, and they've been had a terrible, future ahead of them. But actually they started to see some positives from it and thought, actually, this has been a gift, and I've got so many examples like that. Yeah. So there is a shift that happens when you run, where you start to process your thinking and thoughts and sit with it and start to see it from a different perspective. Right. And that shift has happened, and it's happened anecdotally and also in the science. So I kind of draw on some of that. Yeah. And I think that's really important, and that's what you will get through running, And when it becomes more of a habit, obviously, when it becomes part of your life, you'll start to notice shifts from
Yeah, I mean, I think just to give you a background about me is that I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 8, and then through either school, through senior school, junior school and whatever. And so I actually went to a boarding school, and I think I wasn't very good, academia was not for me, it just wasn't. But the only outlet I had where I was good at, and I was encouraged by one PE teacher, Paul Beavers, who gave me encouragement into basketball, so into sports, and that helped me a lot. And if anything, that has, I'm not, I don't play basketball or anything like that, but that's always been in terms of with my epilepsy. I've always saw exercise as a way to just overcome things, especially that, because it's always been, I've always exercised, I'm not saying I do it, I've done it 3-4 times a week, but I don't know if I go, if I went through months without exercising, then I wouldn't be happy at all. I suppose it's just tapping into the example that you've just said, because that has been my key motivation, that although I still take tablets for epilepsy, and it's not, it's not a, I've pretty much overcome it, and I've outgrown it. So, but still, I'll always have that backdrop of health and keeping healthy and moving, and either going to the gym or running or that, it is so much. I suppose what I'm trying to say is so much part of my life now. Well, throughout. So I suppose that's tapping into what you've just said, sort of thing. And I think, although and there's various, like my mother died when I was quite young, and that kind of thing, but still it's always been there, and it's just it does help, it really does. And you do go through the ups and downs of life, but if you have that that constant,
it's a tool. It's a tool, and that's kind of what I talk about, is that, one thing I'd say, I think I want to be clear about, is that when I say, it's helped people with these things, severe traumas, it's true. It really has helped people through them, but it doesn't make those things go away. So I want to be very clear. If your wife is diagnosed with cancer, she's still going to be diagnosed with cancer. Yeah. That's not going to go away. If you have been through some sort of sexual abuse or whatever as a child, that's not going to go away. But what the running allows you to do is tap into a mechanism within you that allows you to cope with it better, and it does it in so many different ways, which is what I talk about in the book. But it becomes your own internal resource that you can tap into whenever you want. And this is how my running has changed over time, is that now, especially since making the connection during COVID of how it made me feel better and more capable of dealing with stress, that now when I feel it, I just use it. I lean on it. So I'll go for a run. If I feel stressed, if I feel it in my body, if I feel it in my mind, I know that's my cue to be like, okay, I need that time for myself. And 100% of the time, I always come back feeling better, and more capable of coping with it. So yeah, that's just one thing I really wanted to make clear as well. Yeah. It's a tool.
But do you think it's something that when you go out running is that you just mentally switch into this sort of different mode, or do you ask yourself questions, or do you use any techniques? I suppose what I'm trying to say.
Interesting. Yeah. Very, very interesting question. I think this is really, really interesting point, because what it is that I think a lot of this stuff happens unconsciously, in all of the stories that I've collected. So many people talk about these shifts, but they haven't really thought about it themselves until I've kind of asked them, like, oh, what is it that you got out of it? And how did that change your thought about your divorce, or, your wife being diagnosed with cancer? It's kind of come out, and I've kind of teased it out and got these themes out as an analyst. But what I do with the book is that I'm trying to make people more conscious of these things that are happening. So some of the exercises that I've got, I'm getting you to think about what are the thoughts that are plaguing you, before you go for a run, and then evaluate them when you're running. And often you'll find that these things are changing as you run. So I'm trying to awaken people to make those connections. So it's a more mindfulness type exercises. And I think the more mindful we become of what's going on when we are running, then it becomes even more powerful tool, because it's happening unconsciously. But if we can tap into it and apply it mindfully, it becomes such an incredible tool. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah. And that's a wrap for another exhilarating episode of Brian's Run Pod. Thanks for tuning in, folks. As always, we've got your back with all things running. And next week, get ready for some awesome beginner hints and tips to kickstart your running journey. Oh, and before we sign off, exciting news. We're now available on YouTube. So whether you're pounding the pavement or chilling at home, you can catch us there too. Hey, if you want to keep up with the latest updates, behind the scenes fun, and even some exclusive content, make sure to follow me on social media. You can find me on Twitter, or should I say X, at Brian's Run Pod. We've also just launched a shiny new Facebook page. Simply search for Brian's Run Pod and give us a like. And don't forget to hop on over to Instagram, where you can catch all our visual adventures at Brian's Run Pod. For those of you who love diving deep into the episodes, head over to our website, www.briansrunpod.co.uk, and there you'll find detailed show notes, handy chapter markers, make it too easy to navigate through our favourite discussions. Please leave a review, as it will always help others find this podcast. Music is by Happy Days by Stock Audio, not forgetting artwork by Alice Patterson. Till next week, thanks again for listening.